Hi, year 13s. I hope you and your families are keeping well. Today we'll be discovering the last decade in our chronology of key events for the making of modern India from 1940 to 1947. And this can be characterized as a decade in which partition became inevitable. Now, this was primarily because of the fact that the major obstacle to a peaceful transfer of power from the British Raj to India was the Hindu-Muslim divide. So as a result of communalism, the communal tensions which existed between the various religious communities in India, primarily, obviously, as a result of the actions of the British Raj throughout the period, that made partition an inevitable policy to pursue as a result of the many failed missions or plans to reach a settlement with the Indians after, of course, they were sent by the British. So, for example, you've got the failure of the Crips Mission in 1942, and you've also got the failure of the Cabinet Mission in 1946. And these attempts by British members of the government, by sort of cabinet ministers to reach a constitutional settlement with the Indians, all of that comes to no avail, and they fail. So in 1940, you've got the Lahore Resolution, and the Lahore Resolution was essentially it essentially elevated Indian Muslims from the status of a minority to that of a nation. So now Muslims within India as a religious community, whilst they had the status of a minority, they now were sort of transferring their sort of ideals into a nation, and essentially it elevated their status from a minority to that of a nation, and subsequent developments projected Jinnah as their sole spokesman. So Aisha Jalal, a historian, she states that in the 1940s, in particular, Muhammad Ali Jinnah became the sole spokesman of the Indian Muslim community. And this was the basically recognition of this national identity of the Muslims and their right to self-determination. Okay, so the right to self-determination is a right for a group of people to govern themselves, to govern their own affairs, to make their own laws. That a group of sort of ethnic people have the right to independence, their own government. Okay. Now, rapprochement between Congress and the Muslim League at this critical juncture of the early 1940s also became impossible. It was impossible for Congress and the Muslim League to agree on any constitutional settlements, and therefore that sort of paved the way for partition. At the center, the sort of negotiations that took place with Jinnah and the Muslim League and Congress, they really came to no fruition. You've got here the August offer, whereby Viceroy Linlithgow promised that representative Indians would join his council. He assured Muslim League that no new constitution would be adopted without approval of Muslim India. There's many threats to the Raj as well. Now, in 1939, of course, you've got the beginning of the Second World War, and then the British are also drawn into the Second World War. And not only that, Indian resources in terms of personnel, their economy, all of that is sort of exploited by the British to bolster their own sort of war effort, okay? And you've got a number of different problems there. You've got Subhash Chandra Bose, who actually fled to Berlin. He encouraged Indians to fight against the Raj by broadcasting propaganda. He was sent by the Nazis to actually work in Japan and on a sort of possible land invasion on India. In 1944, Bose dies, and he's no longer a massive threat to the Raj. Now, I think he dies whilst he was flying a Japanese aircraft, if I'm not mistaken. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at the time, the American president, he also pressures Churchill to make India a self-governed nation, or they'll get rid of the pact that was made between the USA and the British to help them, obviously, progress in the war effort. Now, this, of course, showed Britain as weak. Now, the Crips Mission. So the Crips Mission came to India in March to April 1942, and it promised Indian self-determination after the war. there would be no elected constituent assembly to which the princes could also nominate their representatives, and the provinces could secede from the union if they so wished. And this gave sort of tacit recognition to the Muslim League's Pakistan demand. More immediately, of course, Indians will become members of the Viceroy's Executive Council in order to so-called prop up war efforts. Okay. Now, Congress rejected this proposal. Okay. Congress rejected this proposal because it did not want to shoulder responsibilities without real power, and it also wanted some control over defense. Okay. Crips, of course, established Crips. He could not persuade them, and he did not get either the cooperation of the viceroy or the support of his own prime minister. Now, the key thing here is Jinnah also rejects the Crips proposal precisely because it did not recognize the Muslims' right to self-determination and equality as a nation. Okay, so the Crips mission overall is a massive failure. In 1942, you've got the Quit India campaign. So, as Congress chose the collision course, they launched the Quit India movement, which aims to make the British Raj ungovernable, okay? And they sort of seek this opportunity to exploit the sort of contextual circumstance as well, the fact that Britain is drawn into the Second World War at the time, so that this Quit India movement, this campaign now, can really, really hurt the British. And so Congress are sort of unsure whether they should agree to go ahead with the campaign, but ultimately their leaders come around and they support the campaign. You've also got thousands and thousands of deaths as a result of the Quit India campaign, and you've got loads of communal riots as well. Now, the problem here for the British is that most of their troops are now stationed abroad, but now some of their troops have to come back to ensure that they're able to deal with challenges within India itself, the nationalist sort of challenges, anti-colonial rebellions within India. Obviously, you can read about this in more depth here. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. In 1943, there was a Bengal famine, okay? And this was caused by a sort of a multiplicity of factors: the loss of imports, wartime price inflation, as obviously a result of the Second World War, severe weather conditions, and it was a run of poor harvest. Now, Churchill and the Conservative government at the time, they failed to deal with the Bengal famine, and this is sort of it is representative, it is a symbol of the fact that British rule in India was neither peaceful, it was neither for the sort of prosperity of the Indian people or their country, and it neither had any sort of aims at consistently creating a self-governing nation throughout the century. Okay, so those of you who answer the nature of British rule question in the 1940s, the Bengal famine is key for you to mention, as well as the sort of the many other famines that took place across the century. The death toll of the Bengal famine has been estimated to be around 3 million. So historians sort of ranges of sort of their estimations of how many people died as a result of the Bengal famine, approximately between like 2.1 million to around 3.8 million. Okay, people died from diseases such as sort of malaria, cholera, pneumonia, and also diseases due to malnutrition. The Wave War took obviously immediate action by battling with London to try and gain millions of tons of grain and stop profiteering. Jinnah at this time accused the British of incompetence, and Congress blamed diversion of foodstuffs to British soldiers as a sort of key cause of this famine. And the British really failed to respond to this famine, and I'll direct you towards some readings which can enhance your knowledge on that. Right, in 1945, the British get ready to grant independence, okay? They realise, and again, this is key for those of you who are answering the nature of British rule question, where you're sort of focusing on whether the British aim to consistently create a peaceful, prosperous and self-governing India, and is also useful for those of you who are answering the how important was Gandhi question. So how important was Gandhi to India achieving her independence. And the reason why this is really, really important, because in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, as a result of the fact that Britain has drained India economically, Britain soon realized that India is no longer a prosperous colony for them to maintain a hold of. Not only that, the British do not have the sufficient funds to maintain India as a colony, and therefore they are forced with sort of no other option apart from seeking to provide India with their independence, and the British embarking on a wider program of decolonization. So the Indians couldn't agree on their own constitution, and that's really clear from the sort of 1930s onwards, with the failure of the sort of roundtable conferences, the lack of agreement on the Government of India Act. You've got the failure of the Crips Mission, and you've also got the failure of the Cabinet Mission as well in 1946. So Churchill believed they were incapable of running their own country and saw them as a great market for British goods, especially with the sort of ensuing depression. But at this moment in time, it was really, really difficult for the British to maintain their grip, their sort of control over India, and essentially it paved the way for independence. Now, the Cabinet Mission in 1946. So, the Cabinet Mission of 1946 is sort of run by the Labour government at the time. And what the Labour government are attempting to do is, because of their sort of warm relations with the Indian National Congress, and sort of the warm relations of sort of Mountbatten going ahead with Nehru and his wife, most of the sort of Cabinet Mission, sort of the representatives, the British representatives, they veer towards favouring Congress rather than the Muslim League. And the Muslim League here then begin to feel left out. So what we have then is the Muslim League accepting the Cabinet Mission, primarily because of the fact that it categorically rejected, which in its preamble, categorically rejected the Pakistan demand, is a subject of sort of contradictory interpretations. Okay, so for Aisha Jalal, a historian, she mentions that the mission plan was a perfect way forward for Pakistan, the Pakistan that Jinnah was after. He never really wanted partition, and the Muslim League reiterated Pakistan demand as its ultimate goal only as a face saver. Jinnah at this time was still willing to seek, a federalist structure within India itself, as long as Muslim majority provinces were protected and the wider sort of rights of the Muslims were safeguarded under any forthcoming constitution which was established. But the Cabinet Mission essentially fails. Nehru publicly announced that Congress could act as it pleased once they controlled the All India Union, and that the three-tier structure which was agreed upon would fall apart because it was only supported by the Muslims. Jinnah was horrified here. He called off the Cabinet Mission and he called for Direct Action Day on the 16th of August 1946. What ensues there is what we call the Calcutta killings. So this popular agitation for Pakistan now was to commence from the 16th of August 1946, which was chosen as a Direct Action Day. And it was on this very day that all hell was let loose on Calcutta. And the reason sort of why this occurred was because the Muslim League believed that, and Jinnah in particular believed, constitutional politics was the solution to these sort of problems, these sort of this impasse between the leaders of religious communities to get on with each other or reach sort of compromise and consensus. But for Jinnah now, the day finally arrived to, in quotation marks, bid goodbye to constitutional methods and prepare his Muslim nation for agitational politics. So what followed next has gone down in history as the Great Kolkata Killing. The Muslim crowd on their way back began to attack Hindus and their properties. The Hindus fought back, and this craziness went on unfettered for 4 days, killing 4,000 people, okay, and injuring 10,000 more. Many historians have argued that this was not unexpected, given the political polarization of provincial politics since the notorious Dhaka riots of 1941. If the Muslim League mobilized the masses around the ideological symbol of Pakistan, the Hindu Mahasabha, a right-wing Hindu organization, had also raised the slogan of Hindu Rashtra, which means Hindu state, and launched a mass mobilization campaign. So again, there was massive communal riots as a result of the leaders' inability to agree with each other. And in 1947, finally, you've got Viceroy Mountbatten hurrying up the process of partition, sort of embarking upon what was called a hasty partition by many historians, particularly by Alex von Tonzelman. And so Mountbatten makes a huge mistake in bringing the date of partition forward from July 1948 to August 1947. Jinnah was also in a hurry because he was sort of diagnosed with tuberculosis at the time, and he was dying. He was sort of on his deathbed. Again, this was also an impossible task. A boundary commission was set up, so Cyril Radcliffe was given the job of dividing India and Pakistan and sort of drawing a partition line across both future countries. This was really, really problematic because after this dividing line, it would undoubtedly create problems on either side. The prince is also expected to become independent, but obviously princely states would not really exist under these two new nation states, and therefore the princely states were given the option to choose which country they would like to sort of accede to according to which country they were closest to. Of course, they would then succumb to the fold of the government created in that specific nation. Obviously, you can read more about Mountbatten and partition in the readings that I provide you with. So this is just a short video to help you make your final set of notes on the chronology of key events.